You want to know what contributes to US GDP being so high? Hurricanes.
This isn't true. Hey, I'm Chris Clark, I'm another economist, and I thought I'd weigh in on this very interesting question. So the argument is that the construction and aid that happens after the event positively impacts GDP. And because hurricanes have been more destructive over time, that is the reason for America's large GDP. For now, let's assume that theory is valid, but let's take it to the numbers and see just how much of an effect it could possibly be. In 2024, the US hurricane season is expected to cost $129 billion. For comparison, in the past 12 months, the United States produced $29.3 trillion of new goods and services. You take $130 billion in damages, divide it by $29.3 billion, and you multiply by 100 to get in percentage terms, that's 0.44%. It's not even a half a percentage point of America's total economic capacity. This place is huge, y'all. But it's not even very clear beforehand that hurricanes will show up positively in the GDP measure. You do have the positive effect of the hurricane relief, government, and private insurance, as well as out-of-pocket spending. But we also get less consumption. There'll be less tourism, a disruption of local regular consumption activity. And then third, there can be some productivity decline, so businesses, employment, and education all experience disruptions, making the existing resources less productive, therefore producing less output than they otherwise would. I'll cite two measures of this effect. This one came out after the Hurricane Katrina. We see initially that the hurricane damaged economic growth in the second half of 2005. The solid line is beneath the counterfactual dotted line. And then during the recovery era, the GDP was growing quicker in the first half of 2006 relative to a scenario without hurricane. But the net effect over the year was statistically zero. Here's another paper published in 2011 looking at the economic growth impact of coastal hurricanes, and this one used decades and decades of data, and we see the similar story. In the initial quarter, the economy suffers from the hurricane, but then there's a positive effect from the recovery, but by the third quarter, there is a negative effect from the hurricane as well. When you add them up, again, they're statistically equal to zero. This particular estimate is looking at state data. It also estimates the effect on GDP and personal income at the national level, finding that there is no effect of hurricane destruction on national growth rates. In fact, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, who publishes the GDP data, explicitly mentioned this in their most recent release. They know that the destruction of structures and buildings isn't going to show up directly in GDP because GDP is about building new things, not the destruction of old things. However, the BEA does measure the total value of capital, buildings, equipment, etc. in the economy. And they estimate that Hurricane Helen resulted in losses of $39 billion in privately owned fixed assets. Our government economic statistical agencies are just incredible in the amount of transparency they have on the strengths and weaknesses of the measures of the economy. For more information, check out this discussion on how disasters affect GDP and other income-related measures. Every economist will tell you that no single measure of the economy can tell the whole story. The economy is too big and affects too many different things. That's why in all my videos I try to cite a whole bunch of different measures. I mean, as one example, if you look at the state of Louisiana in September 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit, the unemployment shot up to Depression-era levels. This is bad. I do have to say, GDP is pretty good. It's like one of our top 3 or 4 measures for a reason. I mean, all of the criticisms against it are true, it's just that they're kind of small in magnitude on their effect. I mean, here's one. The environment is crucial for our long-run economic well-being. But there's not a direct link between carbon emissions and economic output. In fact, all across the globe for the past 20 or even 30 years, GDP has continued to grow, whereas consumption-based CO2 emissions, that's the red line there, has fallen. I say consumption-based because that adjusts for any exporting of pollution to other countries. I mean, other things of well-being, like your health and life expectancy, are closely correlated with GDP per capita. Or we could look at a measure of happiness, such as self-reported life satisfaction, and find still there is a very tight correlation.
So next time you hear a political pundit in the US bragging about GDP,
I think we should brag about GDP because it's so strongly correlated with so many of the other good outcomes we care about. It is the richest economies in the world that take care of the environment better because they have the resources to do so. They're not just trying to survive. But you should never look at it alone in a vacuum. But I don't know any economist who does.